I do believe that adult use marijuana should be legalized federally. Before I get into the points, though, I just want to talk about the fact that this is a position that most Americans have, right? A Gallup poll in November of last year showed that 70%, 7 out of 10 Americans are in favor of legalizing adult use marijuana. Not just that, but it's an incredibly bipartisan thing too, with 55% of Republicans saying they too are for legalizing adult use marijuana. And so we start off this conversation in a place where I believe that it is an inevitable thing that'll happen in this country, and we'll continue to fight till we get there. There's three specific things I want to focus in on why I believe that adult use marijuana should be legalized. The first being the immense relief that it could give to folks dealing with mental health issues or physical discomfort or physical issues, including our veterans, people who work high-stress jobs, and et cetera. We see this in the state of Florida right now. We've legalized medical marijuana. We hope to make the move to adult use marijuana. But even with states with just medical marijuana, it creates a situation where there's a gap, where there's a lot of people who could use that comfort and who could use it to help them out, but they're not able to apply or they're not able to qualify for it. The second thing is that we know the damage that the war on drugs has done to communities across the country, especially minority communities and poor communities. In fact, Black Americans are 4 times more likely to be convicted of a crime having to do with marijuana, even though the usage rates are about the same for white and Black people. And so legalizing it would upend the illegal market and give us, which is the third thing I want to bring up, is tax revenue and the ability to regulate and make sure that it's safe for Americans to use, which we're unable to do when it's illegal.
Well, respectfully, I would have to disagree. I think that it would be a step backwards if we were to legalize recreational marijuana. Now, let me make sure we understand that we're not talking about medicinal marijuana. If you listen to what my colleague just mentioned, he mentioned essentially medicinal uses of marijuana. When you're talking about giving people relief and from stress or whatever it may be, that's a medicinal use. Now, that's a completely different subject from what we're talking about when we're talking about recreational use. And then to talk in terms of the impact that it's had on communities, I would submit to you that it has a negative impact on communities, and submit to you that it has led to more crime. It has led to things that we don't want in communities. And thirdly, tax revenues. Come on, guys, we can do better than that. If we're looking at ways to get tax revenues, I don't think we should be looking at recreational use of marijuana. Now, look, I'm a pharmacist, and I know addiction. I've seen addiction, and I've witnessed it, and I know it is a disease. In fact, we have tests that we can run that can tell you if people are prone to addiction. So, and marijuana use leads to more drug use, and that's something that we have to be aware of, and that's something that I don't think that we can afford in this country. If you look at what happened in Canada, when Canada legalized marijuana, you had a 162% increase in the number of hospitalizations due to psychosis.
Yeah, well, I of course would respectfully disagree, and I want to hone in on the argument of marijuana leading to other drugs or being a gateway drug. I mean, our own CDC says there's very limited evidence and not enough evidence to show that marijuana is a gateway drug to harder drugs. But the other thing I want to focus on is, marijuana, the only thing it's a gateway to is to the criminal justice system, especially for a lot of Black and brown poor communities across the country, like the district I represent. Talking about the tax revenue, I think that's an important conversation. We have to figure out different ways that we can up social services in this country, and many different states that have legalized adult use marijuana have directly used the funds collected from this very large industry and what could be a very large industry and use it to have a universal school lunch. And I think those are benefits. There's not one of the three things I mentioned that I would say is the prime argument. All these things together, for me, create an environment where I believe we need to legalize adult use marijuana. When I think about the fact that there are communities that, yes, suffer from the illegal sales and sometimes crime that's connected to it. Imagine what it'll do when we completely uproot the illegality of it, the crime associated with it, and we legalize it. We tax it, we regulate it, we make sure it's safe, and we believe that people should be able to use marijuana as an adult. I think that For me, it's not that big of a deal, to be honest. And I think that there is no evidence that directly connects marijuana to harder drugs. And our own CDC says that. So I would submit to you that a lot of the arguments we hear against it are quite antiquated, and I think it's a matter of time before this happens in this country.
Well, I appreciate you bringing up the CDC because I think it is important what they have to say about marijuana use, about recreational marijuana use, and they have shown that it leads to temporary psychosis, that it leads to mental health disease, that and especially when it's used at a younger age and used more frequently, that those people experience more mental health, including schizophrenia. And if you look at that, then that in itself is another reason why we need to be very careful about legalizing and even decriminalizing marijuana. This is something that, as a healthcare professional, I just can't sit aside and say that, okay, we're going to just legalize this, thinking that that's going to solve the problem. If you look at the communities, particularly in the Northwest United States, where they have legalized drugs, that has not been the solution. In fact, it's led to more and more problems. So again, according to the CDC, recreational marijuana use has led to more suicide, to more anxiety, and those are things that we can ill afford in our country.
I'd have to look at the CDC data that you're talking about as it relates to psychosis and mental health issues, and I'm not sure what the rates are on that. But my question would be, if that is such a big concern, why would you be okay with it going to anyone, including people who are using it for medical purposes, folks who are in their most vulnerable state of different diseases? I mean, if that's such a big concern, why would you be for medical marijuana?
Look, I have long been an advocate for the medicinal use of marijuana, and I think that we should be doing research on it. In fact, I have signed on to legislation and sponsored legislation that would have led to more research into the medicinal use of marijuana. But there is a big difference between the recreational use and the medicinal use. Let's don't mix apples and oranges here. The medicinal use, it's been shown that children who are experiencing certain problems can actually benefit from this, and if they can, it should be used for that. That's why, again, I have signed on to legislation and sponsored legislation that would lead to this.
No, I completely understand. I guess my argument is that part of your argument was saying that the CDC shows that it can lead to severe mental health conditions and psychosis, and I have to look into that, and if that's true and the numbers are high, it would just be confusing to me that at the same time you'd advocate for the use for medical patients who are at their most vulnerable. The use is different, but the marijuana is the same. I think that, again, this is an issue that has a lot of bipartisan support. It's one of the few things in my state that I can really, wrap hands around and work with colleagues on all sides of the aisle on this. In the state of Florida, it's going to be on the ballot in 2024, and we'll be fighting for it. And look, we believe that this is something that should be the right of adult Americans to use. And I think it will give us some good tax revenue, especially for our municipalities and localities. The number for the federal government might be a drop in the bucket, but when we think about a lot of cities and states across the entire country, they can use this money to help with social services for people in state and municipal government, countywide government. And so appreciate talking with you about this. I know people have many different views, and it's been a great conversation.
Well, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this. But again, I want to differentiate between the recreational use and between medicinal use. There are children who are suffering from seizures who get relief through the use of marijuana, and they're actually one of the ingredients in marijuana has been used many years in pharmacy. I've dispensed it myself, Marinol. And it is something that is useful and that we should be using. I'm not opposed to that at all, but it's the recreational use that I think, and the CDC thinks, would lead to more mental health disorders, more psychosis, temporary psychosis, and as has been proven in Canada, has led to more hospitalizations due to cannabis-induced psychosis.